I had a really strange experience last night that has left me very unsettled. I'm not sure what it was that happened to me, but your channel seems like the best place to get some answers. I live in North Central Florida and have always been fascinated by all things paranormal and cryptid related. My mother is from Romania, so growing up she would tell me stories about werewolves, vampires, and other monsters that lived in her country, things she heard about when she was a young girl. I do a lot of hiking in the Ocala National Forest, which is just 10 minutes from my home. It's an incredibly beautiful area with many springs and clear water lakes filled with fish. The trail system there goes on for hundreds of miles, with numerous campsites available if you want to spend the night deep within the forest where no one will bother you. My mom worries about me going out alone at times, but this is my favorite way to relax after work or on weekends, especially during springtime when everything is blooming. The trails are well marked here, so even though it can be easy to lose track of time since they go on forever, you're never really lost. As far as animals go, we don't really have wolves or bears around these parts, although we did have a bear sighting recently, but plenty of deer, raccoons, and opossums, along with smaller critters such as squirrels. So now let's get into what happened last night. It was around 6 p.m. when I got off work early. As soon as I saw the rain outside, which I loved being out in, my first thought was, I should head over towards Juniper Springs. This spot offers shelter under trees near small creeks running through sandbars, making it the perfect place to set up camp while staying dry from rain. I had my gear ready, and I knew exactly where I wanted to go. I arrived at Juniper Springs just as the heavy rains started coming down hard, which actually made it difficult for me to find a spot with enough cover so that I could set up camp. I finally found an area under some trees next to one of the creeks running through sandbars, but unfortunately, there was no way for me to stay completely dry without getting wet in certain areas. As nightfall approached around 8 p.m., everything seemed calm outside except for occasional thunderclaps off in the distance, along with lightning flashes lighting up the sky every now and then. Call me crazy, but I really enjoyed this weather. My plan was to go to bed early because being alone during stormy weather can be tiring if you're not used to it. Plus, there's always the possibility of encountering wildlife, such as snakes or other animals, while walking around after dark here. Once inside my tent, all seemed peaceful until around midnight when I heard what sounded like someone whispering nearby, followed by soft tapping sounds against the canvas wall directly behind where my head lay. It took a moment to realize this wasn't normal noises. Even though I felt unnerved, I decided to ignore it and try to get back to sleep. Well, things escalated pretty quickly after that because I soon began hearing low growling noises right outside the tent, along with scratching on the fabric above the foot area. I instantly went into survival mode, grabbing a flashlight, which always kept close by, unzipping the tent and turning towards the sound source, pointing the beam at the part where growls came from. At first, I couldn't see anything, except the shadows of tree branches. Seconds later, I caught a glimpse of a large figure moving between trees about 15 feet away. This thing looked massive, its silhouette revealing an outline of a shaggy body resembling a bear or dog, yet something felt off about the shape itself. It didn't look quite right. Despite the fact that it appeared hunched over similar to how a bear would stand on all fours, this creature seemed to have long limbs with thick muscles that bulged out from underneath matted fur, making me think more along the lines of a werewolf than anything else. Around this time, I started feeling an overwhelming dread wash over my entire body, like someone had dumped a bucket full of icy water down my back, causing my hair, neck, and arms to stand up on end. It was terrifying, especially considering that I felt completely helpless due to being trapped inside a tent during a stormy night. I tried to stay calm, knowing that if I let fear take control, I wouldn't be able to think clearly enough to come up with a plan to escape the situation, should the worst happen. It was at this point that I noticed more of them standing near the first one I had seen. It's difficult to explain exactly what these things look like, but the heads were shaped similar to wolves, yet different. This additional group also seemed much smaller compared to the first one that I had seen earlier, possibly cubs or something. The sounds coming from the group included yelping, barking, and growling noises, along with heavy breathing. Fortunately for me, I remained focused on my task, which was escaping unharmed regardless of how unlikely the odds appeared to be stacked against me. After a few minutes, I heard a low whining sound followed by a series of loud snaps echoing through the forest, indicating something large was moving towards me. Suddenly, several sets of glowing yellow eyes came into view, which confirmed my suspicions about the presence of additional creatures standing just beyond my view. After that, everything happened so quickly that I barely remember how I got out or where I ran next. All I know is that I was able to get away from that spot as fast as humanly possible, given the conditions. Once I felt safe enough, I stopped to catch my breath behind a large tree. It was a surreal experience unlike anything I ever encountered during my life to this point. So here I am writing a letter, hoping someone else has seen similar things around these parts, especially the Ocala National Forest. I'm desperate to find answers. I need to understand what I witnessed. I hope to hear back soon since I really don't want to feel alone anymore. And by the way, this encounter just took place last night. Thank you for taking the time to read this. Dear Lilith, I've been a fan of your site for a while now and have always enjoyed reading the accounts that people send in. That being said, I never thought I would be writing one myself. Forgive me if this email is long, but there's no way to tell my story without giving you all the details. I am an avid hiker and spend most weekends exploring trails throughout our beautiful state parks here in Ohio. My favorite spot is Hocking Hills State Park because it has so many different trails to choose from depending on what type of hike you want. Wooded areas, caves, waterfalls, etc. It was about 3 weeks ago when this happened. The day started out normal enough as my friend John and I set off down one of the lesser-known trails at Hocking Hills called Rock House Trail. This trail takes you through some pretty wooded areas before eventually leading to Rock House, which is basically a large cave system with lots of small rooms inside. We had been hiking for about 2 hours when we reached Rock House, where we stopped to rest for a while. After resting up, we decided to continue along the trail instead of heading back like most people do after reaching Rock House. Now at this point, let me explain something. I have seen plenty of weird things while hiking, such as unexplained noises or lights in the sky, but none were truly frightening until now. So anyway, John and I continued on past Rock House along another part of the trail, which leads into an even denser area than before, full of trees with barely any sunlight getting through. As soon as we entered this area, both John and I got an eerie feeling like someone was watching us, although neither one mentioned anything at first. About halfway through this dense section, something strange began happening. We started hearing whispers all around us coming from seemingly nowhere. Sometimes they were louder than others, but never loud enough that we could make out what they were saying. Just random words every now and then. At first, we both thought it was just our imagination playing tricks on us, but as the whispers continued and got louder, we knew something wasn't right. We stopped for a minute to try and figure out where they were coming from, but it was impossible to tell because they seemed to be all around us. As we stood there listening, one particular whisper caught my attention. It said, "Get out," very clearly. That's when I told John that maybe we should leave before whatever is causing this decides to show itself. After agreeing with me, he took off, running back down the trail towards Rock House, while I followed close behind. About halfway back, however, I tripped over a tree root or something, which caused me to fall into some thorny bushes. As soon as I hit the ground, an overwhelming sense of dread came over me like nothing else ever had before. It felt like every ounce of energy had been drained from my body in an instant, leaving me completely helpless. I lay there in those bushes for what felt like hours, although it could have only been seconds, until suddenly everything went quiet. The whispers had stopped. Just as quickly, things went from bad to worse when I heard what sounded like someone running towards me through the woods. This terrified me even more than anything else so far, because not only did I still feel completely drained of energy, but now whoever or whatever was coming at me would surely get here long before I could escape. The footsteps kept getting closer and closer until finally they reached where John was standing, looking down at his phone and checking messages instead of watching where he was going. Now keep in mind that up until this point, neither one of us had actually seen anything strange other than hearing those whispers. Then, out of nowhere, a loud crack rang out through the trees, causing both John and myself to jump. Looking around, trying to figure out what made that noise, another loud crack sounded off, followed by branches snapping above our heads. I looked up just in time to see a large branch come crashing down directly on top of John, knocking him out cold. I yelled his name a few times, trying to wake him up, but he didn't respond. It took about 10 minutes trying to revive him, but he finally opened his eyes and was able to slowly stand up. I decided it was time for us to get the hell out of there. As we turned to leave, though, something caught my eye in the bushes off to my right. A tall, dark figure stood there watching us from only about 10 feet away. It looked like a man at first glance, but upon closer inspection, I could see that this thing had no face, just an empty void where its head should be. Without wasting another second staring at it, I got us back as fast as possible down the trail towards Rock House. When I finally reached Rock House and saw other people walking around nearby, I felt safe enough again for the moment, although what happened still haunts me to this day. We got John to the emergency room where he was diagnosed with a concussion and spent the next week in bed with the lights dimmed. The whole experience lasted maybe 5 minutes total, yet it seemed like hours. Everything that happened defied all logic and reason, leaving me with more questions than answers. What were those whispers? Who or what knocked John unconscious? And most importantly, what was that thing standing in the bushes watching us? I have been back hiking since then because being outdoors is one of my passions. However, nothing has ever come close to comparing what occurred during that hike. Thank you for reading my email and keep up the good work. I'm a fire specialist with the Department of Natural Resources in a northwestern state, but I'm not comfortable saying which state. In case anybody out there is not familiar with that title, a fire specialist is just like a regular firefighter, except that we only deal with fires that happen in our parks and game lands. I'm the type of guy who just clocks in, does what he's told, clocks out at the end of the day, and leaves it behind. Life's too short to dwell on your job after you punch that clock. But recently, something happened on the job that really disturbed me. I've been back and forth over whether I should say anything. My wife says no, that I should leave it be, but I think the people have a right to know. One of our state forests here is very large and very popular. It's a great place for fishing and camping, and it gets pretty crowded in the good weather. A buddy of mine is a ranger there. We were having a few beers one night, and he told me that there had been a rash of Bigfoot sightings in the park. Now you might laugh, but I didn't, and neither did he. It's more common than you think for people to see strange things in the forest, at least around here. While I personally have never seen anything that looked like a Bigfoot, there's been times I've been in the woods and felt like something was watching me. And mind you, that's even happened after an area has been evacuated of the general public, like when we're about to do a controlled burn. Now, when my buddy told me that, I just asked him if anybody had managed to get any pictures. We're all waiting for that day, when somebody finally snaps a picture and proves the existence of these things. He said no, but he and one of the other rangers decided to set up game cameras right in the same area that people had reported seeing the creature. I didn't think too much of it, just said, "Cool, keep me posted," and we moved on to another subject. Then, about a week later, he calls me, all excited, and he says they did it. They got an image. I was stunned. He said it was pretty clear and no one would be able to say it was fake. So of course I wanted to see it. He told me to come on by the station whenever I could get over there. It's about an hour away. Well, we had some family stuff come up right after that, or I would have gone immediately. Nothing serious, but family comes first. It was 5 days later when I finally called my friend and told him I'd like to come by in about 2 days. That was my next day off. I had to leave a voicemail because he didn't pick up his phone. Then the evening before I was supposed to go and see him, I got a call from my supervisor. He instructed me to report the next day to the regional office for a controlled burn. I said, "What? That's my day off. There were no wildfires going on, so why pull me in?" He said it was non-negotiable, and that was that. He didn't give any details, just said I would find out more at the regional office. So, that stunk, but whatever. I showed up there the next day with 5 guys, and we were given the specifics. I was shocked. We were going to burn a whopping 500 acres, based on a spur-of-the-moment decision. I bet you can guess where, too. That's right. They were having us do a ping-pong ball drop right smack over the area that had all of the Bigfoot sightings. A ping-pong ball drop is when we fly over with a PSD dispenser on board. It injects glycol into a plastic sphere that contains potassium permanganate, and then it shoots it out of a helicopter. The combination triggers a thermogenic reaction, igniting the area in a flash. The only other times I've ever been involved in a ping-pong ball drop was when an area was already on fire. It's safer than going in on foot. I'd never seen it used for prescribed burn around here before, but we did it. 500 acres went up in flames, and I couldn't help but wonder if the reason was that they found out that the Bigfoot creature was really in there. I tried calling my friend, wanting to get his take on it. I kept getting his voicemail, and he never called me back. So I finally had a day off, and I went over to the park that he worked at. There was a new guy there that I had never met before, and he said my friend had been transferred, but he didn't know where. This whole thing reeks to me of a cover-up. Last time I talked to him, he was excited about how he and another ranger had finally gotten some pictures of the creature. I wish he had told me that guy's name, the last name at least, though I wouldn't be surprised if he was transferred too. Anyway, I wrote him a letter telling him about the ping-pong ball drop. I didn't say too much, just in case the letter ever gets intercepted, but I wanted him to know, in case he didn't already. I figured his mail will get forwarded to wherever he's living now. All I can think is maybe he's avoiding me. Maybe because he was told not to talk about the picture. It would take a pretty serious threat, though, for him to stay quiet. He's a pretty hard-headed guy. I guess that's all I have to say, except now, whenever I'm told to do a controlled burn, I'm going to wonder if there's an ulterior motive. Cedar Rapids, Iowa, July 2022. I used to be a canvasser for a consumer protection organization. For those who don't know what that means, a canvasser is somebody who walks around town, going door to door, knocking on strangers' doors with a clipboard to ask for donations or spread awareness for a specific cause. The cause we were all working on was pipelines, and the governor's lack of commitment to limit pipelines and new oil and gas infrastructure in the state. As you might imagine, it's a tough job, both physically because we walked about 10 miles a day, and emotionally because the most common response was a door shut in your face. Also, I've been threatened with a gun. I've been hit on by a clearly naked person, and I've had the cops called on me more than my fair share. But honestly, I kind of get it. We are interrupting these people at home without their permission, as late as 8:30 at night. We are strangers, and I, specifically, am a rather large, bearded man. I wouldn't harm a fly, and I consider myself rather jovial and carefree. But random people don't know that when they see me walking up to their house. So again, I get some of their more extreme reactions to a certain extent. One night, though, and I'll never forget this, I got the crap scared out of me. I knocked on a door and nobody answered. Next house. I knocked on the door and chatted with a nice guy for a few minutes. And although this didn't result in any donations or anybody signing up to become a member of the organization, I always appreciated nice small talk chats to break up the monotony of perpetual rejection. Finally, I came up to one of the last houses on my route. It looked like it used to be a grandiose, almost Gatsby-esque house, but it had fallen into disrepair. I knocked on the door, and in an instant it swung open. This woman with large, glassy black eyes and a full face of wrinkles, wearing a white nightgown with messy white hair, was staring right at me. She stared at me so intensely that it felt like her eyes could cut right through me and leave a hole in the sidewalk behind me. Her eyes were lifeless. I gulped audibly. I didn't even know until that moment that that was a real thing people do when they're scared. But I gulped. I managed to open my mouth and just barely squeak out, "Hi, ma'am," when the door swung shut in front of me so hard I thought it might break. While this might sound like a normal encounter on paper, there was something so intense, so unnerving about that woman's empty stare that it set me on edge the rest of the night. Honestly, I would have never told my boss this. I just filled out the rest of my sheet saying that everybody else was not home, so that I wouldn't have to keep working. I took out my phone to watch YouTube or maybe text my friends, anything to take my mind off that woman, but I had no signal, so I just decided to walk around a bit. As I walked along the empty streets, I realized that there is something creepy about the suburbs when you're the only one on the street and all the house lights are off. When it's quiet and still like that, you realize you feel exposed. And then every horror movie you've ever seen comes back to you, and you imagine that Freddy Krueger's right behind you, poised to attack. I kept walking down those empty streets looking for any sign of life so that I could feel better. I knew my boss wasn't picking me up at the van for another 20 minutes, and trust me when I tell you, I knew that was going to be the longest 20 minutes of my life. I turned a corner and I saw some houses with their lights on. I decided to head that way. Like I said, I was done working for the night, and that lady definitely shook me too much to have any motivation left for knocking on doors. But just knowing that there were other people awake calmed my nerves. It's not real protection, but it's a psychological ease of the mind kind of thing. So I was walking towards those houses and already starting to feel a little better when I heard a ruffling in the trees next to me. My heart dropped. I decided to pick up the pace, and to my horror, the ruffling followed me and picked up its pace too. I considered running, but the rational side of my brain took over, and I realized that whatever this was probably an animal. And if it was an animal, it could probably outrun me. So my best bet was to just make myself big and make loud noises to scare it off. I've no idea if this works for every predator animal or not, but it's what I went with. So I got up as big as I could, splayed out my arms with my clipboard in my hand, and I yelled towards the trees. To my shock and absolute terror, the creature in the woods raised itself up too and made itself bigger, and that's when I got my good first look at it. The first thing I noticed was the paws. They were huge, and my first thought was that I royally messed up, and this was a bear. But then I saw the fur. Gray fur. Well, I didn't know of any gray bears, so I started to calm down, thinking maybe this was a big dog or something. And then the thing raised its head above the small brush, and that's when I realized it was a wolf. Well, not a wolf. It had a wolf's head, but it also had what I can unmistakably say was a man's body. At first I thought maybe this was some sicko wearing a mask like in the movie Saw, but then it opened its mouth, and I saw the saliva dripping out of its mouth and the deep shine in its eyes. I knew then that it was not a mask. This was somehow a creature with the body of a human and the features of a wolf. I was too scared to move. The wolf-man creature took one step towards me, and my first instinct was to hurl my clipboard at it. I will never, till the day I die, stop being grateful that my clipboard made contact and hit the creature in the face. It then let out a loud grumble and darted back into the woods, leaving what looked like human footprints behind. I left the clipboard there. I hadn't gotten any donations that day anyway, and I sprinted as fast as my unfit legs would bring me, up near the houses with the lights. Luckily, I had a good signal there, so I called my boss and told him to pick me up early. I think he heard the urgency in my voice, because within 5 minutes, he was there. I never did tell him exactly what I saw. He never asked, but he knew something was up in my body language and the look on my face. I think he knew it was best just not to ask. Anyway, I quit my job a week later. Jacksonville, Florida, March 2007. It was late March of 2007 when I saw it. You probably wouldn't believe me if I told you. It's just that I've got to share it with somebody. Anybody. I figured maybe if more people knew about it, well, maybe someday there might be some real answers. That has to count for something. It might one day even save some lives. Who knows? Maybe they'll collect other encounters about it. So, here goes. I was just a kid when it happened. We were in the middle of soccer practice. It was a late, sunny afternoon, but nothing too blinding. This was back when I was still dreaming of going to Berkeley. One of my teammates kicked the ball really hard. I started for it, but the ball sailed straight over my head and out of the park, across the street, and into a cluster of tightly woven trees. It was weird it would land there because most of the land around the park was grassy and open. But I just dismissed it, and I glanced from side to side in case there was any incoming traffic. The streets surrounding the park weren't overly busy. I watched as one car, a common sedan in navy blue, passed by. Everybody was impatient for me to get the ball, and so I just shrugged and crossed the street. I could see greenery to my right, and as I jogged across the hot pavement, that's when I saw it. My teammates were much too far away to see anything, but right behind the ball, something was moving. Something big. I honestly thought it was a stray dog at first. Anyone would have if they had seen it too. The dark, fluffy head of rust-colored fur could have easily belonged to a Malamute or even a long-haired German Shepherd. It could have even been a cross of the two, I suppose. I watched as the canine's nose wrinkled up and down, taking in each of the scents of the soccer ball. I watched in fascination as it continued to lean closer, and since I liked dogs, I stupidly called over to it, thinking it was friendly. But that's when it happened. The dog glanced up at me, and it began to stand up on its hind legs. I remember the impossibly long shadow as it fell over me. This thing must have easily been twice my size. Whatever its true height was, I was scared, and I'm not exactly the type that's scared easily. Yet in that moment, I could feel the blood drain from my skin as the dreaded creature stared me down with soul-piercing gaze. The yellow eyes were burning embers of something. Something almost human was staring straight through me, almost like it was judging whether or not to let me go. I couldn't pry myself away. Its gaze was absolutely mesmerizing, and there was a dangerous sort of intelligence reflecting back from deep within its eyes. Something far older and much more mysterious than its furry predecessors. I stayed where I was for what seemed like a long time. There really wasn't anywhere I could go, to be honest. I wasn't sure how fast the creature could run, but I was willing to bet that it was a lot faster than me. I was in good shape. I was a kid. But with legs that long, there was no way I could even stand a chance. The thing's stride had to have been more than likely 2 to 3 times mine, and I would imagine it closing the gap between us in a mere heartbeat. The creature then let out a low, guttural growl. It rumbled out like a curious warning, but it didn't sound anything like a dog should have sounded. It was almost like there were 2 different vocal cords. And whatever that thing was, it didn't like me. Now that was fine with me. I didn't much like it either. I couldn't tell its gender in the shadow between the cluster of trees, but it didn't really matter. I bravely reached out with my trembling arm and I pointed toward the ball. And then I watched as the thing used one of its massive clawed paws with nails, reach out, and gave a mighty swing. The ball shot out like a slingshot. I immediately made a dash for it. As I moved, I kept a close eye on the thing and watched at the same time as the ball sailed high over my head. And then it landed. The ball bounced once and it shot forward into the grassy area. I was breathing hard as I picked it up, and then in sheer curiosity, I turned to glance once more at the beast. To my great surprise, it was already gone. I scanned the horizon for any sign of life, but there was none. My teammates were now shouting loudly from somewhere behind me, and yet I had not paid them any attention. I was too wrapped up in my own thoughts. Eventually, I gave up on the hopes that I might one day see that thing again. Whatever it was long gone. I hurried and took the soccer ball back to my teammates, where I immediately shared the story with them. They all looked at me like I was crazy. I kind of thought I had lost it too there for a moment. They figured I was just making an excuse for why it took me so long. In the end, I never did see that thing again, although I went back a few times to that same soccer field and looked. Maybe it was just passing through the area, like some sort of a wandering gypsy. After all, I now believe that anything is possible. Though I think the real question is, what does everybody else think?